back to?
Yeah, it's been brutal. Coming back to thrusters is terrible.
On this episode, I talk with Jack Kemp as he tells me his wild story of becoming the largest Hardee's franchisee in Florida.
So it's a little bit of a convoluted story. So I'll just start at the beginning. So I was in the Army for 5 years, got out, went to business school, and I was working in investment banking up in Boston. And that was great. I hadn't done anything like that in my career in the Army, but it was very transactional. And I kind of found myself missing being on a team because like when you're in the Army,
Right.
You're on like the ultimate team. So I transitioned from investment banking into an M&A role at an insurance company. And one of the first things we did, a big project I worked on, was we kind of sold parts of the company and set up a smaller company within the framework of the larger company. And so I helped on the M&A transaction. And then they said to me, you know, Jack, you helped on the transaction. You should be the CFO of some of these segments of this insurance company. And in my mind, I was like, well, I don't know anything about insurance. I probably shouldn't be a CFO. But my mouth said, yeah, of course. Duh, of course I'm going to do that. So I, was the CFO of these portions of this insurance company for a while. And that was a lot of fun and was learning and kind of helping to set up a business within a business.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like business with training wheels.
You get a lot of that team feeling there?
Yeah, so it was... So I was part of the team and was building something long-term and really enjoyed the people that I was working with, really enjoyed the company. But I kind of found myself, and this will make me sound like a meathead, I found myself missing being in like a tangible environment, because when I was in the Army, I was primarily an infantry officer, and you pick up your rifle and be like, hey, follow me, and we're gonna go over there, and like, it was just like a more, the only word I have for it is like tangible environment. Whereas in an insurance company, again, great people, but it was more, getting lost in Excel and like, no offense to actuaries, but like talking to actuaries for hours on end, it just wasn't my jam. So I found myself kind of liking being on a team, but missing being in that tangible environment. And so I kind of went back to my investment banking days where we had been selling companies that like made products. And I was like, I'm going to try to figure out a way to go back to a company where I can do some of this finance stuff that I really like, but be in like a tangible environment. Yeah. And so I started like applying for jobs at like companies like Boeing and stuff like that. And I had, a few opportunities that seemed compelling, but just for this reason or that reason, they just kind of fell through. And then I started thinking about it a little bit more, and I was like, you know what? I think I know a little bit about financing a company. I know a little bit about transactions, and I had some friends from business school that were like in private equity and buying and selling companies. I was like, yeah, maybe I'll just try to buy a company. And so at first, I was like, all right, I'm gonna find like a niche manufacturing company with defensible margins and high growth and like all of these things. Basically, I had described like the perfect company, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go find this. And so I sort of set off on my merry way to go find that company to buy. And then like 6 months into it, I realized, well, A, it doesn't exist. And B, if you do find it, it's not like somebody's gonna be like, hey, sure, I'll sell this to you at a reasonable price, why not? So I realized if the only thing I was bringing to it was capital, then I was definitionally going to overpay for it. And so then I took a step back and I was like, all right, what do I think I'm good at and what do I think I'm bad at? And I was like, all right, well, I'm not really good at anything. It's like kind of like in the gym, like I'm not good at anything. But I'm like serviceable at leading teams, and I'm serviceable at kind of finance, and I'm serviceable at like, following a playbook, and if we have a plan, I can execute the plan. I can even, to some small degree, come up with a plan. But I'm terrible at sales. I'm terrible at marketing. And so, kind of with that framework, I said, all right, well, what business model fits that? And that led me to franchising, because generally in franchising, you're kind of buying into somebody else's concept where they kind of pick the key things that they'll basically do for you, give you a playbook, and then you kind of provide some capital and you provide some expertise where you're good. And so I got to franchising, and I was like, okay, franchising, I'm gonna do it because this is my opportunity to be an entrepreneur, but not have to be good at everything. Yeah. And then one of the first things I said when I got to franchising was, well, I'm not gonna do restaurants, because like, you could talk to like an 8-year-old and be like, hey, how's the restaurant business? And like, kids are like born knowing, 80% of restaurants fail within the first year. But the franchising restaurants, like, as I researched it more, I realized that that's really not the case with franchise restaurants. Like, if you and I were to like go start like Matt and Jack's Rib Crib, like, it would fail. No offense to you, you're probably great at it, but
got me excited for a second. I thought we were gonna let's do it.
but when you do it through a franchise model, it's been stress tested, and they've kind of got a process for product innovation and marketing and that sort of stuff. And the more I looked at it and the more I networked, and like it, I'm kind of cutting to the chase here, but this took like about 1.5 years to go from, hey, I'm gonna buy a business and do something on my own, to franchising. And then once I got to franchising, I'd be like, okay, fast food is probably the right fit for me.
Yeah.
And then, fast food was a good fit for me for those reasons that I had mentioned. Like, it's kind of operational focused. Yeah. Somebody else does the sales and marketing. And then also, there's a lot of fast food restaurants. There's a lot of really good brands. There's an installed base of lenders and capital. So you know generally what you should pay for the business. Whereas if you kind of go back to my original idea of like finding this like perfect company, it's much more of a individualized market. Like, whereas like in the franchise space, you generally know like, hey, this multiple of that, and this is how much leverage you can put on it, and that kind of stuff. So once I landed on fast food, I was like, like my friends up in Boston at the time, they're like, oh, you should do sushi and salads and like all the kind of stuff that like CrossFit people eat. Yeah. And I was like, nah, I'm gonna go for kind of traditional fast food, mostly because I was trying to de-risk it. And my thought was like, there might be a new sushi concept or a new salad concept, and it might be the greatest thing ever, or it could fail. Whereas if I go with like a more established brand, I'm going to be trading away some growth, but getting more stability. And so since I was kind of going all in on this with my personal finances, I wanted to de-risk it. Yeah. And so then I started looking for the right brand at the right price in the right location. And to me, the right brand meant kind of, as I said, those established brands. The right price, I'd kind of done some research and understood, as I said before, like generally how much you should pay for them and that kind of stuff. And then the right location, to me, meant an area where I'd be kind of going with the tide. So for example, I was up in Boston at the time, and a lot of good things to say about Boston, but it's not the area where you would want to start a fast food business, just because development's expensive and it generally harder to get them to approve a new fast food restaurant. Whereas kind of the Sun Belt, North Carolina down through kind of the Panhandle and the Gulf states, populations are growing, and it's just sort of easier to develop.
There's more opportunity to establish yourself.
Yeah, and like, one of the big drivers of really any business, but fast food in particular, is population growth. And Florida is obviously gaining a lot of population every year. So I was looking for the right brand at the right price and the right location. And then so I started that process, and there was a little bit of a circular reference, kind of, because you can't just kind of wake up and be like, oh, I'm going to buy some fast food restaurants, and then go on Craigslist and be like, oh, okay, I see, 15 Wendy's for sale, and so you kind of have to line up three big participants. You have to find a willing seller, which generally means like another franchisee. You have to be approved by the franchisor, and you have to, unless you're sort of sleeping on a lot of money, you have to find a lender that's willing to lend you some money. And the seller won't sell to you unless you're approved by the franchisor and you have financing. And the franchisor won't approve you unless you have a seller and financing. And the financing won't finance you unless you're approved by the franchisor and you have a seller.
Quite a process.
So it's a mass. You can't have one until you have all three, and you can't have all three until you have one. So that took about 2 years,
Really?
just kind of networking and meeting lenders and meeting franchisors. And when I would talk to franchisors and I would talk to lenders and I would talk to sellers, I would say kind of basically what I said a few minutes ago. They're like, hey, listen, I think I'm good at leading teams. I think I'm good at following a process. And a lot, like, this is going to be just like it was in the Army. It's going to be, having a team, setting standards, having them show up on time in uniform and executing against that plan. And they would all kind of chuckle and be like, oh yeah, sure, right. But eventually, I got to know people, and the conversation went from, hey, will you sell me your restaurants? No, because you don't have financing or franchise approval, to, well, I know you've talked to the franchisor. If you come back with financing, yeah, we can have a conversation. And I'd be like, well, hold that thought. And then I'd kind of go back to some lenders and all that. And I sort of iterated my way through that. I looked at a lot of deals. I looked at about a little over 70 deals over the course of 2 years. And a lot of those deals weren't, I knew they weren't going to be actionable, but I did them just for kind of the muscle memory, like to use like a lifting it out, like it was a warm-up set.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I know I'm not going to buy this, but I'm going to just do it just so I kind of stub my toe or mess up in this process versus something that I really care about.
Right.
And, I went through that process again. It took about 2 years. And then I was looking at some Hardee's franchisee deals, and I mentioned that you have to have franchisor approval. And so every time I would talk to any franchisor, including Hardee's, I would be like, oh, you should sell me some company restaurants. And they'd always be like, well, Jack, we don't sell company restaurants, and we're certainly not selling to you who has no fast food experience. But I think the Hardee's people eventually just got sick of me, and they're like, well, all right, listen, you could take a swing at these 10 restaurants down in Tampa, and if you could do it, great, but you're probably not gonna be able to do it. And so kind of put in an offer, pulled together the financing, and that last transaction, they hadn't sold restaurants in a few years, and I had never bought restaurants, and I had never done, I had done M&A stuff, but I had never done it on my own. And so it took about 6 months, but in July of 2013, we closed on 10 Hardee's restaurants in Tampa, Florida. Also in July, moved from Boston down to Tampa, and we closed on July 29th, and then 7 days later, my second daughter was born. So wow. July 2013 was just like a massive amount of change. Like, move halfway across the country, quit my job, new industry, everything, wow. A new baby. So that was a busy time. And it turns out that I was sort of 70% wrong about hey, it'll be just like the Army.
Yeah.
But
I can see how there's parallels.
Yeah, it's like one of those things that, like, at 50,000 feet, they're the same thing. Yeah. But at, when you're nose to nose with it, it's a lot different.
Yeah. What are those differences?
Well, the biggest difference is that, for me, was that in the Army, by the time I was kind of out in my unit, the soldiers in the team had been through kind of 3 or 4 vetting processes, so basic training and advanced training, and then some time in a unit. And like, I had been through 18 months of schooling, like just Army schooling before I showed up in my first unit. Whereas, in quick service restaurants, it's the tip of the spear in terms of your first job ever. So, and there's, a lot of great things about that, but it also just creates a lot of friction when kind of getting, folks that this is literally their first job, literally the first time they've had to show up on time anywhere. But you end up with, over time, like some really great people. But cool. that was sort of the biggest change out of the gate. And then the other thing that was a little bit surprising to me is, again, in the Army or even in M&A transactions that I had done in corporate America, there's always like a kind of big safety net around you. So for example, on that first transaction, like when I had been involved in M&A before, like it's easy for me to sit here and say like, oh, I had done M&A, but really I had just done kind of my lane. And then with this first deal on my own, we're like 2 or 3 weeks out, and the seller is like, okay, so how are you gonna do payroll? And I was like, I had not considered that. Yeah. And so I had to kind of find vendor partners to help me figure that out. So that was the other big difference that in the Army, you got big Army to help you out. In corporate America, you had that. And, my first thing in there was just like that stuff that you just had to figure out on your own. Yeah. But I was fortunate to find a lot of good partners to help me through it. And, obviously got it to work out. And just an illustration of what a terrible sales and marketing guy I am. So the name of my company is Phase 3 Star, and it's called that because I'm terrible at marketing and sales. And Phase 1, I was in the Army. Oh. Phase 2, I was in corporate America. Okay. And Phase 3 is franchising. And then the star is just because there's a star in the Hardee's logo. And then just to belabor the point about how terrible I am at this concept of marketing, we have a Wingstop business that is Phase 4 wings. Mind blowing.
I was going to ask what's Phase 4.
Yeah, I used to say there's no Phase 4. Like franchising it, no Phase 4, and now there's a Phase 4.
Another franchise.
Right.
Yeah.
No, but it's been great. I mean, the business has grown. Great team. If you'd told me. If you told me in high school that I'd be kind of working in fast food or in college or in, grad school, I probably wouldn't have believed you. I mean, I love what I do. It's a kind of a surprising outcome, but it's great, mostly because of the people I get to work with, both at the franchisor and within my own company. But interacting with the guests is great. It's been great. My mom probably would have believed that I was going to work in fast food. Yeah. Like, you don't straighten up. You're going to work at a gas station or in fast food. Which is funny because now, like, I remind her, I'm like, hey, Mom, you were right. She's like, it's not the same. But it is the same, Mom.
That's funny. Yeah. That's funny. So, has your military background helped differentiate you from other people in the franchise industry, you feel? Like, has that been an advantage to you?
I don't know that it's an advantage relative to kind of other people in the space. I mean, I will say that I can't say enough good things about the Army and my experience in it. To some extent, I feel like I learned, I definitively learned more about kind of leading teams and being part of a team as an infantry platoon leader in the Army than I did at any academic school or in any position afterwards. So, I can't say enough good things about it. I mean, I will say that I am now definitively an indoor dog, and so I think about kind of life in the Army, and I'm like, I'm good keeping that in the rearview mirror. Yeah. Good. That's a young man's game.
Yeah. So. That's cool. Well, you had a fundraiser soon or something you wanted to tell?
Yeah. So I'm involved in John Hopkins All Children's Hospital. I'm on the foundation board there. Every year we do a fundraiser in the restaurants to kind of ask guests to add $1 to their check to kind of help the hospital. So I got involved in that, and then shortly after I got involved in it, my older daughter had a infection that actually ended up she needed to go be hospitalized for 5 days. So, and they took amazing care of her. They ended up having to kind of wrap her in gauze, and she looked like a mummy, literally. But it was a scary thing, but they took amazing care of her, just like, they take amazing care of very needy children in the community. So I got originally involved because there was a strong overlap between my team and what the mission of the hospital, so serving the community's most needy children, and also my customers. But then I stay involved because they did such a great job helping Mary. And so I have 2 daughters, Mary, 9, and Lilly, 6. And I had been taking them to a daddy-daughter dance basically since I've been down in Florida. So since Lilly was like a baby.
Yeah.
And that was down in Sarasota. And, my fiance Erin and I were talking about how it didn't seem like there was a real kind of wow daddy-daughter dance here in Tampa. And so we got with the Hopkins team and we pitched that idea, and they said, "Oh, that's a great idea. You should do all the work for it." I'm kidding. They've been super helpful about setting it up. But it's going to be on November 9th at the Orlo in South Tampa. It's going to have carriage rides and aerialists. I'm not going to be an aerialist.
No? Oh, okay.
But there's stilt walkers and that kind of stuff. Crafts for the kids. Obviously food in a bar. But really, I think my girls, it's the highlight of their year, this daddy-daughter dance that we have been going to. And my intent or vision is that this event in Tampa becomes sort of the event that all the girls are like, "Dad, you got to take me to this year after year." So,
cool.
I think it's going to be an amazing event. It's going to go, all the proceeds are going to go to benefit the Children's Hospital. So it's a great event for a good cause, and might be a unicorn there.
Oh,
so,
wow.
I can't,
I didn't know those existed.
Well,
wow.
you have to go to find out. So it's going to be an amazing event. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about it. Thank you.
Problem. Thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for your service too.
Thanks.
Appreciate you serving in the Army for our country, and thanks for coming out.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Cool.